around the time that Blaine first came into our lives. I would be about 5 years old, and prior to this, it had just been the three of us, my mom and my sister and me. Blaine was a long-haul trucker that would sometimes be gone for days. But I remember him coming around was like, it was exciting. It was awesome to have any male figure around. As a young boy, I didn't even realize that I was missing a father figure. I played, little league baseball, so you see every other boy there with his dad. And uh, dad shows up to watch him play. So the few times that Blaine made it to my games, it was big. So anytime that those holes were filled were important. He seemed like Superman. He had his foot on the pedal kind of personality about everything. When my mom first started dating Blaine, he was pretty decent, but that kind of changed after they got married. Sometimes you can see the monster that's in front of you and you can tell, you just know. But he flew under all those radars. He flew under every radar possible, and he had everybody fooled. We lived in an apartment complex with other families and young kids my age. One night, the kids that all lived in the apartment complex, we were all sleeping on the grass. Everybody just had blankets and pillows, but it was pretty late. And the silence was broke. You could hear like a quiet grumbling, and nobody really knew what it was. And it just kept getting louder. And from one direction, it was Blaine in the green machine. It was a 1977 Chevy, but it had a Corvette engine in it. And so it was unbelievably loud, it was unbelievably fast, and he came flying past all of us. By then, everybody's awake, everybody knows it's him that went by, and the sound kept going until it was almost gone. By then, police cars, two of them, came past us. And they were pushing their cars to the limits too, but they didn't have a chance. And the sound kept going, and then it came back and got louder again. And Blaine came from the other direction, flew into the apartment complex. You could hear him slam on the brakes and screech the tires, parked the truck, and you could hear his cowboy boots, click, 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 and came running past all of us, put up his hand, said, "Hi, kids," and just went into the apartment and shut the door. They never found him. They never caught up to him. But it was something that I'll just never forget, like the sound of that engine and like seeing it go past. It's something that you only see in movies. It didn't seem like Blaine's running from the police. He must have done something super wrong. To all of us, it seemed great. It's only looking back now as an adult that I realized how dangerous and irresponsible all of that was. I don't think he cared about dangerous at all. Blaine liked toying with police. He liked toying with people in general. He would do things without thought of consequence. It was just another game. Yeah, this is a picture of me and my sister. During this time, like if I needed something, I'd go to my sister. If I had a problem, I'd go to my sister. But it's hard that we don't have a relationship. Her and I have just, we've just never addressed the real reasons. I don't have anybody else. And that's something that I just had to deal with a lot of years of silence. One morning, my sister and I were watching Saturday morning cartoons. I'm pretty sure we were fighting over the station. So he decided that our punishment for fighting over the TV would be to punch each other in the arms.
That's enough!
Basically, for my sister and I to punish each other, that way he didn't have to, but he would still get to watch. Like it made it like such a competition that you weren't really thinking about the consequences or if you were gonna get hurt or if you were gonna hurt somebody. It's not like I could just say, no, I don't want to do this. You know, that was it. That was what you were doing. The more we started punching each other, the more it kind of became personal for my sister and I. Like, it wasn't about the TV anymore. As it would go on, I was really taking the worst of it. The more it started to hurt, the more I started to cry. And he kind of had rules for it. Whatever arm you punched with was the same one that you had to take the punch with. And as longer it went on, the more violent it became. There was a lot of happiness and pleasure in Blaine's face while we were doing it. A monster forces children to fight against each other. A maniac, a hunter, a predator, all of those things. And then looking back on it, he was like that when he got there. You know, this wasn't something that came on gradually for him. All this, whether he knew it or not, all this stuff was already mowing around in his head. He just had to have an outlet, and the outlet was my sister and me. He was practicing to be a monster. This would be our race team. This is chariot racing. That would be Blaine in the chariot. And that would be me right in front of the chariot. You can barely see me. It was something that my grandfather started in our family. So every Saturday was race day. This is what country people do with their farm horses on Saturdays. It was fun. It was amazing. And nobody fights on that day. I wish every day was race day. When we would race our horses, Blaine had a helmet that he would wear in the chariot. And it was green, but we changed colors from green to yellow. So we bought 99-cent spray paint, spray painted the helmet, and it was in our back washroom drying. And I went back there to get something, but I had bumped it. And it fell off, so I picked it up and set it right back on there. Later on, when Blaine and my mom got home, all I heard from the back room from him was like, "What happened to the helmet?" Always felt like I had to walk around eggshells around Blaine because it always changed. I never knew what I was going to be in trouble for. You just never knew what Blaine you were going to get, so you never knew what punishment you were going to get. I knew it was all downhill from there. He decided the punishment was going to be to get hit with this rubber cooking spoon that my mom used. And I still remember to this day, he called it taking the position. I'd have to bend over and put my hands on my knees and get ready for the spoon. Blaine enjoyed every minute of it. The more he saw you struggle or the more that he saw you in pain, the longer it took. It was the worst physical pain that I had felt up to that point in life. I can still hear the sound of it. I can hear it hit me. I can hear how the sound that it would make as it was coming to hit me. And he just kept hitting me. It was miserable. And just knowing that the next one's coming. And that no one's gonna stop him. Again, I'm sitting there in the middle of a punishment that I just don't understand. I don't get it. My mom was mad about it, but it wasn't, she wasn't mad because, like, did you see what you did to him, or do you know how bad you hurt him? She was mad because she thought somebody was gonna see it. So after that, it didn't stop anything. It just made it so he had to be more creative and find ways to punish me without actually hitting me. As I got a little bit older, my mom and Blaine decided that I needed to do chores and started giving me a few responsibilities, which is fine. But one of my first responsibilities was to sweep out the garage. And I remember sweeping it, and I remember doing a pretty good job. And I didn't know it, but the whole time I was doing it, he was watching me. And I swept everything up except for the last little bit that's usually there that nobody can get with a broom and a dustpan by themselves. And I remember taking the broom and just kind of pushing it off to the side.
You all done? Just about.
So he asked me what I was doing. And he's like, did you sweep it all up and get it out? And I said, yeah.
Yes, sir. I was watching you.
And so because I had lied to him, or I didn't tell him the truth the way he wanted to hear it, I guess, he decided to punish me because of that.
Now, come on!
So we had this like small crawl space under our house. It was like walking into a big like grave, like a big dirt grave. The air doesn't move in there. It just has dead spiders, dead mice. It just was a really desolate, horrible place. So that room, oh man. He didn't even go down in that room. Like nobody in the family would go down in there. I often didn't understand what it was I was being punished for, and I still didn't understand why. I didn't get it. Like, you just can't do that to somebody. I cannot go into crawl spaces to this day because I know I'm not there. I know I'm not in that room, but it stops me and it freezes me, and I feel trapped. When I was in that room, there was no escape. There wasn't like, oh, if I can wait till he walks away and I can sneak out and stuff like that. No, there was no doing that. But I wasn't even able to talk to my mom about the abuse, and I wasn't able to open up and say anything like, you know, that had been going on, that like, because she was there for the majority of it. So I don't really know that like there was anything to tell her. It just felt lonely because my mom was, she was like mute. Like had the way she dealt with it was by being silent. I didn't feel safe anymore. I really didn't. I didn't feel safe. So this is a picture of me in the background, and right here in the bottom, this would be our bird. But I think this one slipped past my mom. I think if she would have known that this was Blaine's leg right here and that was any part of him, she just would have thrown it away. My mom destroyed anything with Blaine in it. And those would be his cowboy boots right there. Those are the boots. That's the boots that I would get kicked with 10, 12, 15 times a day. Because of my mom intervening over him hitting me with that spoon. He didn't like really spank me or physically like beat me for a while. But it was okay to kick me with the side of his boot. And if I flinched, he'd do it again. And if I tried to move, he would do it twice more. But it was humiliating to have to like stand there and wait to take it. Because it would happen in front of my mom or my sister, and so it was just humiliating in front of everybody. My real father had moved to California, so every summer my sister and I would go and see him for the first couple months of the summer and then come back home, get ready for school. But there was one particular year I did not go. It had been like probably like a week and a half since my mom had talked to my sister. And so my mom tried to call my dad, and my dad was saying, well, she's gonna live with me now. And she doesn't want to talk to you. She doesn't want to have anything to do with you anymore. I'm gonna fight for custody. She's gonna live with me. And so my mom started freaking out and wanted to speak to my sister. He wasn't having it. My dad wasn't having it.
Put her on the phone.
So Blaine got on the phone, and Blaine told him that you have about an hour to make plane reservations, or I'm gonna be on your front doorstep in 12 hours, and you won't like it if I get there. The things I heard him say, it scared me because I knew that he was capable. It wasn't yelling over the phone. It was the most convincing, scary, soft tone, evil thing that you could imagine a person saying. But it was the calm and scariness of it that made it real. It was terrifying. And he hung up like my sister was home like 2 or 3 days later. It was like I guess it could be considered a family night. We were just sitting and watching TV. We were watching PBS during fundraising time. It kind of started off like we were joking about how nervous the girl looked, and how she kept fumbling over her lines, and like, oh my gosh, this is live TV.
She's terrible.
And so Blaine decided to make it more fun for him.
Call now. Call the number on your screen.
You'll see.
He said, you guys watch this. And he called the pledge number, and within a few minutes, he had convinced the people at PBS that he was going to donate a large amount of money, and that he just wanted to thank the girl that was on TV.
Thank you so much.
And he went from thanking her to telling her that, like,
I'm gonna hunt you down and gut you like a fish.
I could see the fear on that lady's eyes on live television. I was more terrified when I heard him talking to that lady that way, because it was just so attainable for Blaine. Like, it sounds real. But he scared this woman, and the absolute terror that was in her face was really funny for him. To make that switch and to flip over into, like, demon mode, I guess, it was very easy for him.
She's leaving.
I tried to like think of any of his like female victims. Like I just can't even imagine like the whole that had to have been left in their existence from him just being in their world for a few minutes. And man, I feel so bad for everybody that he hurt. I can't apologize enough, but I know it doesn't really mean a whole lot. I'm not his advocate, not his lawyer. I don't know how it feels, but I've been hit by that train. As I got older, Blaine started taking me out on the road with him. Those times, Blaine was different. I didn't have to worry about getting kicked and to have to take the position or get hit or, I didn't have to worry about him backhanding me or just anything when we were in the truck. For me, it was amazing. I was seeing the world from a semi-truck. I get to eat beef jerky and trash food for a couple days and soda, and he would treat me, we'd get along. He would treat me more like a friend. He treated me almost like an equal. So one night we had just gotten onto the freeway and we were on the freeway for maybe 7 or 8 minutes. A highway patrolman started waving for us to pull over. So as we were getting pulled over, Blaine reached back into the camper part of the sleeper and he grabbed a handgun and put it underneath my seat and told me to sit on it and told me that unless the cops told me to get out of the truck, to stay where I was sitting. I don't know if he'd stolen the gun or committed a crime with it, but he definitely didn't want them to see it. You don't question it, you do what you're told. And so he got out and he talked to them for a few minutes. And then one of the police officers opened up the driver door and said, "Your dad's getting arrested and his boss is coming to pick up the truck and take you home." And so that was it. Blaine was under arrest. Blaine's boss bailed him out immediately. We were back on the road as planned, and Blaine never even said another thing to me about it. I still don't know what they pulled us over for. He never told me. My mom never spoke of it. So it got swept under the rug as far as it was none of my business, but they were looking for him. And he would spend extended times away from the truck. During the times when I was sleeping, I would kind of wake up and realize the truck wasn't moving, but it was running. But Blaine wouldn't be in the truck. And I knew better than to get out and go wandering around and looking for him. We weren't just pulling over and taking a break. But in residential areas, we were kind of pulled over and stopped for large, weird, just odd amounts of times. When we should be driving and going and getting another load and coming and dropping it off, we're in a neighborhood for no reason. So it was not just the amount of time, but the odd times, the witching hours, that people are out doing bad stuff. Those were the times that he was saying that he was working. But there was gaps. My mom came and picked me up from school one day, which was very, very odd because I would walk every day. And when I got into the car, she was crying and sobbing, kind of crying, and had been all day. Her eyes were puffy and stuff. I could tell she was a mess. And so she's like, "I came and picked you up because I need to talk to you." And so she just blurted it all out. She says, "I'm just telling you that Blaine's not coming home." And I probably was one of the first people that she was able to talk to about it. So she kind of just exploded and said that Blaine had cheated on her. I remember in my head thinking well, what are we gonna do now? And so my mom, reassured me that that I'm here and it's just me, you, and your sister again. And it'd been a long time since I'd heard her say that. And so there we were, we were at that. I didn't feel relief because like I said, over the few years leading up to that, I didn't feel 100% safe with my mom either. I didn't want him to come back, but it was my dad. So he was my father figure. That was what I was dealt with. It was different for my mom and for my sister. They experienced their own thing. You know, my mom lost her husband, and to my sister, she lost a stepdad. But I lost my father figure and my stepdad. So it was a punch. It was a big punch. I went through a really crazy stage over the immediate fallout from that. I had a small little cubby hole that was above my closet. I didn't feel safe. And so I would like hide up in there and I would sleep up in that cubby hole. So it was just easier to like hide. And all that time he punished me and would isolate me and make me be by myself. And in the end, that's the only place I got any peace. That's the only way I would feel okay. Is if I closed everybody off and closed everything out. I really believed that Blaine was gone for good. It had been about 2 years since he left, and one morning I woke up and surprise, he's back. He was there with his bathrobe on. He said, like, and this is something that I haven't told you, he never called me my name. A piece of never called me my name. He had a nickname for me, and I just don't want to say it. I don't want to repeat it. He said, "Hi, Ryan," but instead of Ryan, he called me that nickname that he always called me. So it was almost like going all the way back. There he was. It was like the gut punch, like a little bit of disgust, a little bit of like the bewilderment. Why are you here? My mom just told me Blaine hired a private investigator a long time ago, and he knew where we were at the whole time. He seemed like a kid with a big old lollipop in his hand. He was happy. You could tell that like he was back with my mom, like that little smirky smirk. He was there to stay. It didn't seem like he was leaving that day or anytime soon. I don't get scared when I watch horror movies because those people they're not as scary as like my stepdad was. When Blaine came back into our lives, I was a little bit leery of his intentions. But he was trying to just be a father and a husband. But I think that's what makes him the most dangerous, because he had all of the masks that were necessary to fool everybody. Blaine said that he was working 2 different part-time jobs, and so he would go away for long stretches of time. And then one morning, he left and he just didn't come back. A couple days went by And then there was just a small clipping that my mom had cut out of the paper. And she's like, here, I need to show you this. And she just showed it to me. She didn't say a word. It just said, local man has been arrested for rape. When I read it, I was almost like, okay, like, that's horrible. Like, local man arrested for rape. I'm like, what does this mean? She's like, it's Blaine. And it's like, I could feel like the color, like, leave my own face. The story was like, Mr. Nelson is accused of 17 rapes, but is admitting to over 100 nationwide. And you hear something like that, and you're like it just doesn't register. It doesn't register like, because I know what damage he did to our family. Now there's like 100 other families out there, 100 other women that have to try and explain that to their children or to their husbands, or, you know, if they don't have any of that, like, there are 100 other women out there that So I'm looking at a police report from Ogden Police. In 1983, he went into an apartment with the intention of stealing money or purses. A girl was asleep with no clothes on. He took advantage of her in the moment and raped her. And that is what started him. Number 2 was the Apple Grove Apartments. He said the girl had 2 children and believed this rape occurred in 1984. One of the worst things that's on here is that the dollar amounts are there from the women that he stole. When he got into a purse and stole $2. He got into a purse and stole $17. Number 6. Nelson explained how he entered the house and had intercourse with the victim. Number 7. Nelson said that the keys were left in the door and had intercourse with the victim. Looks like there's at least 25 in this report. That's all the ones that I see in this report. Nelson explained that there were more, but at this time he doesn't remember where they are. Nelson said that he would pick the houses by the looks of their yards, the cars around it, and he would simply go from house to house and checking doors. He said that you would be surprised the amount of doors that people would leave open. It also became a game to see if the police could catch him.
Why did you laugh there?
Because I was a witness to Blaine playing games with the cops by driving 100 miles an hour past me and running from the cops. And you can see no matter what it was, whether he's out like playing a board game or whether he's like violating a woman's life, it's still a game. It was still a game to him. And that's just not fair to any of these women. Like, I hate seeing it like this, because you know that behind every one of these black marks is somebody's name. It's another gut punch, and I feel horrible. I can't even put into words how I feel. I don't know, it's been a minute since I like even talked to my mom and my sister. Like, we don't have a relationship like at all. I just don't want to face it or talk about it. I wish my mom would have said anything. That's something that came from in here that wasn't something that she felt like she had to say because that's what parents say. Like, I'm sorry you're messed up in this. I'm sorry that this is your life now, but we're gonna get through it, kind of thing. It didn't happen. I just want to say to my mom and my sister that if they do end up seeing this, that I know you both have a story too, and I would like to hear it before it's too late. After Blaine left, it took a while, but I started to find a little bit of relief. The monster was gone. I don't know if it's going to do any good to tell my story after so long, but there's a lot of people out there that probably never caught their boogeyman. And so, I don't know, it may do nothing to come and talk to you guys in the end, but hopefully it will. Like, for some of his, I don't know, for me, for some of his other victims, for my mom and for my sister that still don't want to acknowledge any of this. It's like still walking on thin ice. There's spots and there's times sometimes if you stop, you might hear a couple cracks underneath you, but you got to keep moving or you're going to fall. And there are some days where it swallows me whole. But those are the days that I will try to find some solace with my children or with my grandbaby. I have such a beautiful wife and family that they don't deserve for me to wallow in it. They deserve for me to be present. You know, maybe there's a kid out there that's locked in a crawl space or something that the next time they get out, they'll call somebody or they'll say something and it won't happen anymore.
That you already committed a violent act?
Yes, but my wife, I cut her with a butcher knife.
I just felt helpless again, like, I just wanted to get to her.
He grabbed a hold of me and threw me down on the bed and was choking me. I'm thinking to myself, I'm pregnant and he's trying to kill me.
I've seen this look right before he explodes. People call him a monster and keep calling him evil. It's probably because it's true.
My mother was strangled so severely her larynx was snapped in half. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a brother. I hope God does not have mercy on his soul.
He got that gun and he started beating me with it. He was like a monster when they just hatch.
There is a stretch of asphalt in the American South that serves as a vital artery of commerce, travel, and daily life, yet it harbors a dark, almost incomprehensible legacy. Interstate 45, a major highway cutting through the state of Texas, connects the sprawling, densely populated metropolis of Houston to the idyllic, sun-drenched coastal tourist destination of Galveston. Every single day, tens of thousands of vehicles travel this corridor. Families heading to the beach for a weekend getaway, commuters navigating their way to massive office buildings, and long-haul truckers transporting goods across the state all share this ribbon of concrete. To the casual observer, it is just another busy American interstate, flanked by the usual scenery of fast food restaurants, massive billboards, brightly lit gas stations, and 24-hour convenience stores. But if you look closely at the landscape that borders this highway, particularly as you approach the areas surrounding League City, the scenery begins to shift. the concrete and commercialism give way to something far more desolate, primitive, and unforgiving. This is a region defined by its harsh environmental extremes, an area where civilization seems to abruptly end, surrendering to the wild, untamed forces of nature. And it is within this precise geographical transition that one of the most agonizing, protracted, and haunting chapters in the history of American criminology was written. This area has come to be known by a moniker that evokes an immediate sense of dread. It is called the Texas Killing Fields. The name itself is not an exaggeration, nor is it a sensationalized creation of the media. It is a grim, literal description of a brutal reality that has plagued this region since the early 1970s. The horror of the Texas Killing Fields does not merely stem from the staggering number of victims who have been claimed by this land. While the sheer volume of loss is devastating in its own right, the true nightmare lies in a profoundly disturbing criminological anomaly. Law enforcement and federal investigators eventually came to a chilling realization that shattered conventional profiling. This vast, desolate landscape was not the exclusive hunting ground or private graveyard of a single, prolific serial killer. Instead, it was a shared territory of death. Multiple, entirely independent serial killers, operating completely unawares of one another across different decades, all recognized the same dark utility in this specific patch of earth. They all looked at this desolate environment and saw the perfect place to dispose of the evidence of their monstrous crimes. The Texas Killing Fields became a geographic magnet for evil, a communal dumping ground for predators who utilized the land to swallow their secrets whole. To understand how such a prolonged and devastating series of crimes could occur, one must deeply examine the geography and the unique environmental characteristics of the area, particularly a 25-acre stretch of land located along Calder Road in League City. This specific location is essentially a wasteland, a forgotten remnant of Texas's industrial and agricultural past. It is a dense, almost impenetrable marshland, characterized by sinking mud, stagnant water, and overgrown, tangled vegetation. Dotted throughout this hostile terrain are the rusting, decaying remnants of abandoned oil fields, standing like silent, iron monuments in the thick brush. The physical environment here is not just a backdrop to the crimes, it is an active, vital accomplice to the murderers. The predators who utilized this area understood, either instinctively or through careful calculation, that the land itself would do the work of hiding their atrocities. The climate of southeast Texas is notoriously brutal, and in the killing fields, these weather conditions create a forensic nightmare. The heat during the long summer months is oppressive, baking the earth and creating a stifling, inescapable oven. Coupled with this relentless sun is a suffocating humidity that hangs heavy in the air, a thick moisture rising from the coastal swamps. When a victim was left in this environment, the decomposition process was accelerated to an astonishing degree. The oppressive heat and pervasive moisture acted as a catalyst, breaking down organic matter with terrifying speed. Within a matter of mere days, the harsh elements would systematically strip away the most crucial tools available to homicide detectives. DNA, the cornerstone of modern forensic science, would be rapidly degraded and destroyed by the intense heat and bacterial growth fueled by the swamp water. Fingerprints, delicate and easily compromised, would vanish as the elements ravaged the remains. Trace evidence, such as stray hairs, clothing fibers, or skin cells from the perpetrator, would be washed away by sudden, torrential coastal rainstorms or blown into the dense brush. Furthermore, the isolation of the Calder Road area meant that the land was teeming with local wildlife. Scavengers, native to the marshlands, further disrupted the crime scenes, scattering what little remained and complicating the efforts of search teams and medical examiners. The perpetrators knew that if they could just get their victims to this 25-acre patch of mud and weeds, nature would systematically erase the narrative of the crime. The earth would consume the evidence, leaving behind nothing but unidentifiable fragments and agonizingly unanswered questions for the families left behind. It was a perfect, self-cleaning disposal site, provided entirely by the natural topography of the Texas Gulf Coast. The strategic advantage of this location cannot be overstated. From a predatory standpoint, the logistics of the Texas Killing Fields offered a terrifying convenience. The highway, Interstate 45, acted as a high-speed conduit between the hunting grounds and the disposal site. A perpetrator could easily stalk their prey in the densely populated, anonymous crowds of Houston, or among the transient, relaxed tourists in Galveston. They could abduct a victim in a moment of vulnerability, force them into a vehicle, and slip seamlessly into the heavy flow of interstate traffic. Within a matter of 20 or 30 minutes, they could transition from a highly visible, populated environment to absolute, undisturbed isolation. Calder Road provided immediate, unlit access to the dense swamp. The killers could exit the highway under the cover of darkness, drive a short distance down the rutted, unpaved paths of the abandoned oil fields, commit their horrific acts or dispose of a body, and then merge right back onto Interstate 45. They could disappear into the stream of thousands of headlights, leaving no witnesses and putting miles between themselves and the crime scene before the victim was even reported missing. The highway provided both the victims and the escape route, while the swamp provided the vault. The human toll of this geographic nightmare is staggering. Since the early 1970s, more than 30 bodies have been discovered discarded in the brush, submerged in the shallow waters, and buried in the mud of this area. The victims were not random cross-sections of the population. A tragic and distinct pattern emerged early in the timeline, highlighting a specific demographic targeted by the monsters patrolling the interstate corridor. The overwhelming majority of the victims were women and teenage girls. Their ages ranged, tracing a heartbreaking timeline from innocent 12-year-old children to young women in their early 30s trying to navigate adulthood. There was often a haunting physical similarity among many of them. They were frequently described as slender, often with long flowing hair, fitting a particular profile that seemed to draw the attention of the predators cruising the highway. These young women and girls vanished from the mundane, everyday locations that line any major American roadway. They disappeared while walking alone along the shoulder of the highway, perhaps trying to get home after a car breakdown or an argument with a friend. They were taken from brightly lit gas stations while stopping to make a quick purchase. They vanished from the parking lots of convenience stores, places that are supposed to be safe, public hubs of activity. One moment, they were stepping out of their daily routines, and the next, they were swallowed entirely by the Texas killing fields, their lives extinguished, and their bodies tossed aside like discarded refuse in the unforgiving marsh. The tragedy of the Texas killing fields is heavily compounded by the systemic failures and societal biases that plagued the initial years of the crisis. In the 1970s and 1980s, the approach to missing persons, particularly missing young women, was vastly different than it is today. When the first few victims began to disappear, there was a tragic lack of urgency. Many of these young, vulnerable girls were quickly and unjustly categorized by local law enforcement. Instead of being viewed as potential victims of violent abductions, they were dismissed as rebellious runaways. Police operating under the cultural assumptions of the era frequently assumed that these teenagers had simply chosen to leave home, effectively closing the door on any immediate, aggressive search efforts. Others, due to the locations from which they vanished or their personal circumstances, were marginalized by societal prejudices and written off as sex workers or drifters. This institutional apathy resulted in the catastrophic loss of the most critical period in any missing persons investigation, the golden hours. While families frantically searched the streets and begged for help, the official response was often sluggish and dismissive. By the time law enforcement realized that a predator had taken these girls, by the time the bodies were eventually discovered in the decaying landscape of Calder Road months, or even years later, the trail was entirely cold. The swamp had already done its work, destroying the evidence, and the killers were long gone, protected by the passage of time and the decay of the physical proof. Furthermore, the bureaucratic landscape of the region heavily favored the killers. The corridor of Interstate 45 runs through multiple different counties and numerous local police jurisdictions. In an era before the digitization of records, before email, centralized databases, and sophisticated crime-linking software, information remained heavily siloed. A girl might vanish from a gas station in one county, and her body might be dumped 20 miles down the road in an entirely different jurisdiction. The detectives in the first county were looking for a missing person, while the detectives in the second county were looking at an unidentified homicide victim. There was little to no communication or cross-referencing between these separate agencies. Each department treated their respective cases as isolated, localized incidents. They failed to see the broader, terrifying pattern that was emerging along the highway. They did not realize that a hunting ground had been established right in their backyard, and because they did not connect the dots, the killers were allowed to operate with virtual impunity. The lack of a cohesive, unified investigative strategy meant that the victims were failed twice. First by the society that dismissed their disappearances, and second by a fragmented justice system that was utterly unequipped to handle the scale and nature of the crimes being committed in the shadows of the interstate. It would take decades of agonizing grief, tireless advocacy by the families of the victims, and massive leaps forward in forensic technology before the true, sprawling nature of the Texas killing fields would finally be dragged into the light. Calder Road is an unassuming dirt path located just off the massive concrete expanse of Interstate 45. To the unknowing eye of a passing motorist, it is just a utility road, a forgotten slice of League City infrastructure leading into the overgrown, rusted remnants of old oil fields. But for the families of the victims, and for the detectives who spent their careers chasing ghosts, this specific 25-acre stretch of marshland is the epicenter of an unending nightmare. It was here, submerged in the suffocating heat and concealed by dense, tangled brush, that a terrifying cluster of discoveries would forever alter the history of Texas law enforcement. While the entire highway corridor served as a sprawling hunting ground, Calder Road was the chosen vault for a particularly haunting sequence of tragedies. Between 1983 and 1991, this small patch of desolate earth surrendered the remains of 4 young women. They became inextricably linked not by how they lived their lives, but by the exact, brutal location where they were discarded. They are known collectively as the Calder Road victims, the most infamous and deeply investigated cluster within the broader Texas killing fields narrative. Their individual stories expose the ruthless efficiency of the predators operating in the area and highlight the agonizing, slow crawl of justice that spanned multiple decades. The grim sequence of discoveries at Calder Road began with a young woman named Heidi Villiers Fye. Heidi was 23 years old, a young adult trying to find her footing in a world that was abruptly and violently stolen from her. In the year 1983, Heidi simply vanished. One moment she was part of the fabric of her community, and the next, she was a terrifying void, an unanswered question that plunged her loved ones into an immediate state of desperate panic. The agonizing months that followed her disappearance were characterized by a profound, suffocating silence. Extensive law enforcement searches yielded absolutely nothing. The local landscape offered no clues to her whereabouts. It was as if she had simply evaporated into the heavy Texas humidity. But the swamp is patient, and eventually, the natural environment reveals its dark secrets. In 1984, the agonizing waiting period ended in the absolute worst possible way. A dog wandering through the dense, overgrown brush off Calder Road returned to its owner carrying something that immediately triggered a massive police response. A subsequent, painstakingly slow search of the desolate, muddy terrain uncovered Heidi's remains. The environment had been brutally unkind to her, but forensic examination revealed a terrifying truth. Heidi had not just been murdered, she had been subjected to a savage, merciless beating before her life was extinguished. The sheer level of violence inflicted upon a young, vulnerable woman in such an isolated location sent a massive shockwave through the local law enforcement community. They were no longer dealing with a simple missing person case. They were looking at the work of a deeply disturbed individual who possessed a terrifying capacity for rage and who knew exactly where to hide the physical evidence of his brutality. Heidi's discovery proved unequivocally that the marshland was being utilized as a graveyard, but no one involved in the investigation yet comprehended the massive scale of the horror that lay hidden just beneath the surface of the mud. The realization that Calder Road was an established, active disposal site solidified with the agonizing case of Laura Miller. Laura was only 16 years old, a teenager with her entire life stretching out ahead of her. She was not a hardened adult navigating dangerous circles. She was a high school student, a child still under the protective wing of her family. In 1984, the very same year Heidi Fye's remains were discovered, Laura vanished without a trace. She had simply walked to a local convenience store, a completely mundane errand that countless teenagers perform every single day without incident. But Laura never returned from that short walk. Her disappearance perfectly encapsulates the systemic failures and tragic biases discussed previously. Despite her young age and the sudden, entirely uncharacteristic nature of her vanishing, the initial police response was agonizingly slow. Authorities initially dismissed the 16-year-old as a runaway, acting on the fatal assumption that she was just a rebellious teenager who would eventually return home when she was ready. This bureaucratic dismissal robbed the investigation of its most critical momentum, the vital early hours where evidence is fresh and witnesses are accessible. But Laura's father, Tim Miller, knew his daughter better than anyone. He knew with every fiber of his being that she had not run away, that she had been taken against her will by a predator cruising the area. Abandoned by the system that was built to protect his family, Tim Miller was forced to become an investigator himself. He organized his own searches, pleaded desperately with the community for information, and endured a daily psychological torture that most people cannot even begin to fathom. For 2 excruciating years, Tim Miller lived in a state of suspended animation, hoping against hope while simultaneously dreading the inevitable phone call from the authorities. That call finally came in 1986. While searching the very same area of Calder Road where Heidi Fye had been located, investigators made another devastating discovery. They found Laura. She had been discarded in the same unforgiving, muddy environment, her remains left to the harsh elements. The proximity of her body to Heidi's confirmed the most terrifying theory imaginable. A serial killer, or perhaps multiple killers operating independently, had claimed this specific 25-acre patch of League City as their personal dumping ground. The grief experienced by Tim Miller is impossible to quantify in words. The justice system had failed his daughter in life, and the brutal Texas land had consumed her in death. However, this profound, shattering tragedy would ultimately give rise to an incredible, enduring force for good, channeling his unimaginable pain into a relentless, lifelong drive to ensure no other family would have to endure the isolation and helplessness he felt. Tim Miller would eventually found Texas Search. This organization would grow into a world-renowned search and recovery group, utilizing horses, drones, boats, and thousands of dedicated volunteers to find missing persons globally. Laura Miller's life was tragically cut short in the dark mud of Calder Road, but her legacy, forged in the intense fires of a father's love and absolute devastation, would go on to bring thousands of other lost souls home to their families. While the identification of Heidi and Laura brought a devastating, heartbreaking finality to their respective families, the horrors of Calder Road were not yet fully unearthed by investigators. The same year Laura Miller was found, in 1986, search teams scouring the grim, overgrown landscape stumbled upon another set of remains. This victim, much like the others, had been left exposed to the oppressive heat and aggressive wildlife of the swamp. The harsh elements had completely erased her physical identity. She carried no identification, and the advanced state of her remains made any form of visual recognition entirely impossible. She was designated by the medical examiner simply as Jane Doe. The inherent tragedy of a murder is profoundly compounded when the victim's very identity is stolen from them, when the life they lived, the people who loved them, and the name they answered to are entirely erased from the world. Jane Doe became a ghost, tethered permanently to the desolate stretch of Calder Road. 4 years, she rested in a local cemetery under a blank headstone bearing no true name, a silent, tragic testament to the cruelty of her killer and the severe limitations of forensic science at the time. The chilling pattern repeated itself exactly 5 years later. In 1991, the marshland surrendered a 4th victim to the authorities. Discovered in the exact same geographic cluster, another young woman was found, her life violently ended and her identity swallowed whole by the mud. She was systematically named Jana Doe. The presence of 4 bodies in such incredibly close proximity permanently cemented Calder Road's dark reputation, but the existence of a 2 unidentified does hung over the community like a heavy, suffocating shroud. Who were these women? Who was desperately waiting for them to come home? For over 3 long decades, the answers to these fundamental questions remained buried alongside the victims. The original investigators who worked the cases retired, the files gathered dust in evidence rooms, and the names of Jane and Janet Doe became synonymous with the insurmountable challenges of the killing fields. It was a profound miscarriage of justice, a reality where the victims were denied even the basic human dignity of their own names. But science, unlike the physical evidence left to rot in the swamp, does not decay over time, it evolves. In 2019, a monumental, historic breakthrough finally occurred. Utilizing the revolutionary, highly complex technology of genetic genealogy, advanced investigators were finally able to extract viable DNA profiles from the decades-old remains and meticulously trace their familial lineages through public databases. After more than 30 years of languishing in the dark, the ghosts of Calder Road were finally given their names back. Jane Doe was positively identified as Audrey Lee Cook, a 30-year-old woman who had vanished without a trace, leaving a void in her family. Janet Doe was revealed to be Donna Prudhomme, who was 34 years old when she was taken from the world. Restoring their rightful names did not bring them back, nor did it immediately identify the specific hands that ended their lives, but it powerfully stripped away the anonymity that the predators had heavily relied upon to cover their tracks. Audrey and Donna were no longer just sterile coordinates on a police crime scene map. They were human beings with rich histories, families, and lives that mattered deeply, lives that were viciously interrupted on the side of Interstate 45. When examining the 4 specific women of Calder Road, and indeed looking at the broader spectrum of the more than 30 victims swallowed by the Texas killing fields over the years, a chilling and highly specific victim profile heavily emerges. The predators hunting this desolate interstate corridor were not striking blindly or at random. They were selecting their prey with a terrifying, calculated consistency. The victims were overwhelmingly young women and teenage girls, with their ages ranging primarily from the highly vulnerable age of 12 to their early 30s. They often shared a distinct physical typology, frequently described by witnesses and families as slender with long, flowing hair, a haunting visual similarity that strongly suggests a very specific, deeply ingrained predatory preference among the killers operating in the area. But perhaps the most unifying and utterly tragic thread connecting these diverse women was their acute vulnerability in the exact moments before they were taken. They were specifically targeted in spaces that should have offered safety, or at the very least, public visibility and the protection of crowds. They were taken while walking alone along the shoulder of the highway, perhaps seeking help for a broken-down vehicle, or simply trying to navigate their way from one place to another. They were abruptly abducted from the brightly lit, seemingly secure environments of local gas stations and neighborhood convenience stores. The perpetrators ruthlessly exploited the everyday, mundane routines of these women, actively transforming completely ordinary moments into fatal, inescapable encounters. They preyed upon the physical isolation of the highway and the highly transient, anonymous nature of the convenience stores, striking quickly and silently before dragging their terrified victims into the absolute abyss of Calder Road. The collective, overwhelming tragedy of Heidi, Laura, Audrey, and Donna, along with the dozens of other unnamed women who share their dark fate, paints a devastating portrait of a landscape besieged by an unseen, multifaceted evil. The dawning realization that young women with similar physical features were vanishing from public spaces and turning up murdered in a specific, highly localized swamp fundamentally altered the psychology of the surrounding Texas communities. The highway was no longer viewed as a symbol of travel, connection, and freedom. It rapidly became a corridor of extreme, unpredictable danger. The simple, everyday act of stopping for a tank of gas or walking down a familiar street suddenly carried a heavy, unspoken terror. The community was violently forced to grapple with the terrifying reality that lethal monsters were actively living among them, utilizing the local, familiar geography to hide their atrocities, and successfully evading police detection for decades on end. The faces of the victims, forever frozen in their youth in missing posters and newspaper clippings, serve as a constant, agonizing reminder of the incredibly heavy price exacted by the killing fields, a price paid exclusively in stolen futures, shattered families, and an unending, collective grief that still permeates the region today. The realization that the Texas killing fields were not the domain of a solitary, maniacal killer, but rather a communal dumping ground for multiple, independent predators, fundamentally transformed the entire investigative framework. For decades, local law enforcement and federal agents had operated under the assumption that they were tracking a singular, elusive ghost who moved with calculated, superhuman precision. They scoured the marshlands and interviewed hundreds of persons of interest, hoping to uncover the identity of the person responsible for the string of murders along the Calder Road corridor. However, as the body count grew and the forensic evidence began to reveal divergent patterns of violence and time frames, the investigative consensus shifted toward a far more terrifying reality. The killing fields were a geographic convergence point where separate, unrelated serial killers utilized the same desolate, convenient terrain to dispose of their victims. This meant that the detectives were not fighting one war. They were fighting several, simultaneously, against different enemies who shared nothing but a common preference for the isolation of the League's city marshes. Among the various predators who eventually had their names etched into the dark history of the region, William Lewis Reese stands out as the most chillingly clear example of the type of transient, predatory violence that plagued the Interstate 45 corridor. Reese was not a local fixture, nor was he a phantom who lived in the shadows. He was a man who utilized the highway itself as his primary hunting ground. 4 years, he remained a name in the periphery of law enforcement databases, but the depth of his monstrosity did not fully surface until the year 2016. It was then that the legal system finally caught up to his spree, as Reese, faced with the crushing weight of modern forensic evidence, chose to offer a confession that would crack open several long-standing cold cases. He admitted to the brutal murder of 12-year-old Laura Smither, a young girl whose disappearance in 1997 had devastated the community and mobilized search teams that spanned the entire state. Her death was not just a singular event. It was the catalyst that pushed the limits of the investigation and forced a national reevaluation of how such crimes were handled. The confession of William Lewis Reese did not end with the tragic account of Laura Smither. In a series of morbid revelations that left seasoned detectives shaken to their core, he proceeded to guide authorities to the exact, remote locations where he had interred the remains of other victims. He led them to Jessica Kane and Kelly Cox, 2 young women whose families had spent nearly 2 decades in the agonizing, liminal space between hope and despair, never knowing if their daughters were dead or alive. Reese's ability to recall these locations and the specific details of his crimes served as the final, damning piece of evidence that the justice system had desperately required. He was the embodiment of the interstate predator, a man who moved effortlessly between the populated hubs of Houston and the secluded, swampy peripheries, taking lives and then returning to the highway as if nothing had occurred. His eventual sentencing to death was a landmark moment, providing a measure of closure for the families who had suffered under his shadow, yet it also underscored the terrifying ease with which a single individual could exploit the geography of the killing fields to perpetrate a cycle of horrific violence. Contrasting with the calculated, roving nature of someone like Reese was the deeply disturbing and often surreal case of Edward Harold Bell. Bell was a man whose psyche was clearly fractured, a predator whose dark cravings had spanned decades and whose identity became increasingly entangled with the myths and rumors of the Texas underworld. In 2011, long after he had been imprisoned for an unrelated murder, Bell decided to break his silence in a way that left both the public and investigators deeply conflicted. He confessed to the killings of 11 young women, a group he chillingly referred to as his Dirty Dozen. His claim was as grandiose as it was unsettling, designed, some argued, to cement his status as a legendary figure in the annals of serial crime. However, the sheer volume of his confession and the specific details he provided, however fragmented or inconsistent they might have been, forced law enforcement to re-examine the early 1970s. Bell died in prison in 2019, taking a great many secrets with him to the grave. His involvement, while perhaps not as neatly catalogued as that of Reese, provides a window into the long-standing, generational nature of the violence at the killing fields. There is little doubt among veteran detectives that Bell was active in the area during the dawn of the killing fields era, and his proximity to the early disappearances suggests that he was likely responsible for at least some of the victims whose remains were never definitively linked to another killer. His case highlights the immense difficulty of retroactive investigation. When a predator is left to roam for decades, the trail of bodies he leaves behind becomes buried in the sediment of time. The blurriness of Bell's confessions, the inconsistencies, and his eventual death in custody represent the ultimate frustration of the case, the inability to ever fully map the reach of his damage. He remains a shadow, a figure whose actual toll on the community will likely never be fully accounted for, a haunting reminder that for many of the victims of the 70s, justice would remain perpetually out of reach. The tragedy of the killing fields was not just about the killers themselves, but also about the potential for wrongful accusations and the irreparable damage caused by investigative malpractice. Consider the case of Michael Lloyd Self, an employee at a local gas station who was convicted for the murder of 2 young women in 1971. 4 years, his convictions served as the official resolution for those specific crimes, a neat, tidy ending that the authorities could present to a desperate public. Yet, as the years passed and the true nature of the killing fields emerged, the foundation of the case against Self began to crumble. Many legal observers, and even some members of law enforcement, came to believe that Self had been the victim of a systemic failure, potentially being coerced into a false confession. The shadow of suspicion turned toward others, including a man named Don Larson, a former police officer whose reputation had been tarnished by allegations of corruption and abuse of power. The idea that a member of law enforcement, someone tasked with upholding the peace, might have been a predator stalking the very streets he was meant to protect, is a concept that shakes the foundations of communal trust. The investigation into the possibility that Self was a fall guy for a much larger, more insidious cover-up involving individuals like Larson reveals the layer of rot that can settle into a police department when it becomes more concerned with closing cases than finding the truth. If a man like Self was wrongly imprisoned while a predator like Larson or someone else was permitted to continue hunting, then the injustice of the Texas killing fields is doubled. It is a narrative of not just death, but of institutional betrayal, where the victims of the swamp were ignored and the innocent were sacrificed on the altar of bureaucratic convenience. Perhaps the most tragic figure caught in the swirl of suspicion surrounding the Calder Road area was Robert Abel, a former NASA engineer who lived a quiet, retired life in a house that overlooked the very property where the bodies were discovered. Abel, who kept horses on his sprawling, semi-secluded estate, found himself in the crosshairs of an investigation that lasted for years. Because of his proximity to the discovery site, he was frequently named as a primary suspect. His home was subjected to multiple intrusive searches, and his reputation was systematically dismantled by the relentless curiosity of the media and the suspicion of the police. Despite the aggressive, long-term focus on his life, not a single shred of forensic evidence was ever produced to link Abel to any of the disappearances. He remained a man under siege, a resident whose only crime seemed to be living in the wrong place at the wrong time. The weight of being a perpetual suspect in such a high-profile case eventually took its toll on Abel, whose life was defined by the suspicion that clung to him like smoke. He always maintained his innocence, a lonely, defiant voice in a chorus of public accusation, until his tragic death in 2005 in a train accident. His story is a poignant, necessary chapter in the history of the killing fields because it illustrates the collateral damage of a broken investigation. When detectives fail to find the actual perpetrator, they often look for the most convenient face to fit their theory, and in doing so, they can destroy the lives of those who have absolutely no involvement in the crimes. Robert Abel stands as a testament to the fact that the shadow cast by the Texas killing fields did not just claim the lives of those found in the marsh. It also darkened the lives of those who were unfairly caught in the dragnet of a desperate and often misguided quest for an answer. These individuals, Reese, Bell, Self, Larson, and Abel, form a disparate, haunting mosaic of the human element involved in this dark history. They show us that the killing fields were not just a site of physical horror, but a vacuum into which the ambitions, failures, and darkest impulses of an entire community were pulled. The fact that the list of names associated with the area is so long and so varied only serves to reinforce the central, most terrifying truth of the Texas killing fields. The land was an equalizer for monsters. Whether a transient killer looking for a place to hide a victim, a disturbed individual projecting his own legend, a victim of systemic corruption, or an innocent bystander caught in a web of public hysteria, all were brought into the orbit of the Calder Road marsh. This convergence created a complex, multi-layered mystery that defied the simple, linear narratives of crime solving. As the decades dragged on, the complexity only deepened, and the hope of uncovering the full, unvarnished truth became an increasingly distant possibility. The investigation of these suspects, both the guilty and the accused, underscores the immense difficulty of disentangling the threads of justice from the knot of horror that was the killing fields, a struggle that would continue to define the lives of everyone involved for generations to come. The process of holding these individuals accountable was a slow, agonizing crawl that mirrored the very nature of the crime scene itself. A long, difficult slog through thick, unforgiving mud, where every step taken toward the truth was fraught with the possibility of sinking deeper into the mire. The staggering length of time it took to address the horrors of the Texas killing fields cannot be attributed to a lack of effort by individual investigators, but rather to a profound, systemic paralysis that defined law enforcement in the late 20th century. As the bodies began to accumulate, the investigative process was repeatedly stifled by a fractured, bureaucratic landscape that prioritized local jurisdiction over regional cooperation. The corridor of Interstate 45, which stretched like a jagged line through several different counties, acted as a series of impassable walls for information. In the 1970s and 80s, police departments operated as autonomous kingdoms, protective of their own files and skeptical of outside interference. A girl might vanish from a shopping center in one county, leaving her family to report her missing to local patrol officers, while her body, weeks or months later, would be discovered by a completely different sheriff's department in a distant, unmapped marshland. These departments had no integrated database to cross-reference these events. They were not sharing reports, they were not communicating about common victim profiles, and they were certainly not linking the rising tide of disappearances to a singular, sprawling hunting ground. This administrative isolation meant that the killing fields existed in the minds of the perpetrators and the grieving families long before it was ever formally acknowledged by the authorities. The technological limitations of the era further exacerbated this fatal disconnect. Without the benefit of digitized records, email, or a centralized, high-speed national crime database, the process of linking crimes was an agonizingly manual, labor-intensive, and prone-to-error endeavor. Detectives were literally sorting through stacks of paper, relying on memory or personal relationships with peers in other departments to connect the dots. When a file was created for a missing person, it remained in a physical cabinet, often gathering dust as the case transitioned from an active investigation to a cold case. The sheer lack of communication between the Houston police, the Galveston authorities, and the various sheriff's departments in the smaller counties along the interstate created a vacuum of information that allowed serial killers to operate with almost complete impunity. They were moving across jurisdictional boundaries, fully aware that if they crossed the county line, they were essentially leaving behind the reach of the investigators who were looking for them. This was the greatest gift that the geography of the highway could provide to a predator, a lack of cohesive, unified oversight. Compounding the structural incompetence was a deep, pervasive societal prejudice that directly influenced the priorities of the police. During the 1970s and 80s, the cultural lens through which law enforcement viewed missing persons cases was fraught with harmful assumptions. Many of the young women who were targeted in the killing fields were dismissed from the outset as runaways. If a teenage girl went missing, the prevailing, and often unchallenged, institutional narrative was that she had chosen to flee a difficult home life. This biased assumption allowed the authorities to minimize the urgency of the situation, often waiting days or even weeks before launching a serious search. This delay was catastrophic. The first 48 hours, the golden window, are the most critical for securing evidence, interviewing potential witnesses, and tracking the movements of a suspect. By classifying these women as runaways, the police effectively burned the bridge to potential justice before it could even be built. The families of these victims were forced to fight against the system as much as they were fighting to find their missing children. They were treated as if they were overreacting, as if their legitimate fear was just a parental overreach. The prejudice didn't stop at the assumption of runaways. Many of the women were also unfairly marginalized based on their personal choices, their economic status, or the places where they were last seen. If a victim was a young woman who walked the highways or frequented certain types of venues, there was a systemic tendency to blame the victim for her own circumstances. This was a dark, unspoken code in law enforcement at the time, where some lives were deemed more worthy of an intensive, high-priority investigation than others. Because the victims were not from prominent families or did not fit the archetype of a perfect citizen, their disappearances were not treated with the gravity that a serial murder investigation demands. This institutional apathy was a second, quieter form of violence, one that enabled the killers to continue their work, knowing that the police were not looking for them, and that even if they were found out, the community would be slow to react. The victims were being systematically erased, first by the men who took their lives, and then by the institutions that were supposed to defend their existence. The frustration of the families during this period reached a breaking point, a collective, silent scream of agony that lasted for decades. They organized their own grassroots efforts, putting up posters, holding vigils, and demanding answers from officials who were either indifferent or overwhelmed. They were the ones who kept the cases alive, who refused to let their daughters and sisters be forgotten in the mud of Calder Road. Yet, they were constantly met with the same circular logic. We don't have enough evidence. We don't have a suspect. This case is too old. Your daughter likely walked away. It was a cycle of gaslighting that stripped the families of their peace and denied them any semblance of closure. They were living in a state of purgatory, never knowing if their loved ones had been harmed or if they were still out there, somewhere, waiting for a savior who never came. The psychological weight of this uncertainty, combined with the cold, bureaucratic wall of the police departments, created a trauma that spanned generations. It was only when the tide of forensics and the advancement of digital information started to erode these barriers that the truth began to emerge. The transition from the old, analog methods of the 70s to the high-tech, data-driven approach of the 21st century was not immediate. It was a slow, painful modernization that arrived far too late for most of the victims. As DNA testing became more refined and the ability to compare genetic profiles across state lines became standard, the disparate, isolated files finally began to coalesce into a broader picture. But even then, the system was playing catch-up. The sheer number of unidentified remains, the Jane and Janet does, continue to haunt the laboratories and evidence rooms for years. Every time a new technological breakthrough occurred, it opened a sliver of hope, but for the majority of the victims, the damage was already done. The physical evidence had been destroyed by time and the elements, leaving the investigators with nothing but the ghosts of the past. The tragedy of the killing fields is, in many ways, the tragedy of the transition period between these two eras of justice. The victims of the 70s and 80s were the sacrifices on the altar of a changing system. They were lost in the gap between the outdated methods that failed them and the advanced technologies that could have saved them. The institutional failures were not just a series of mistakes, they were a systemic denial of the rights of the victims to be heard and the right of their families to know the truth. Looking back at the record, it is clear that the lack of cooperation was the single greatest barrier to success. Had there been a central task force in the mid-70s, had there been a unified, interstate approach to the disappearances along the I-45, it is almost certain that the killing spree would have been stopped years earlier. The predators were not geniuses, they were just opportunistic, capitalizing on a system that was too slow, too divided, and too blinded by prejudice to see the monster standing right in front of them. The history of the killing fields is a stark reminder that justice is only as strong as the systems that uphold it, and when those systems fail, the most vulnerable among us are the ones who pay the ultimate price. The path to the truth was blocked by layers of indifference and bureaucratic inertia, and it took the persistent, burning rage of the victims' families to finally start tearing those walls down, brick by agonizing brick. It was a long road, often dark and always difficult, leading through the very same marshes where the victims were found, a path that remains stained by the memory of the thousands of hours wasted and the dozens of lives that could have been preserved had the system functioned, even with a fraction of the necessary urgency. The investigation was not a race against time. It was a war against the silence of the swamp and the apathy of the institutions that were supposed to be the guardians of the public safety, a war that the victims lost long before the authorities decided to acknowledge that a conflict was even taking place. The final act of the Texas killing fields saga did not arrive as a singular, dramatic verdict that swept away all darkness, but rather as a series of uneven, painful judicial proceedings that unfolded over several years. For the families who had endured decades of silence, the courtroom became a place of both confrontation and agonizing reflection. When the legal system finally reached the point of trial, it was rarely a straightforward process of justice. Instead, it was an attempt to reconstruct the shattered pieces of lives lost, often decades prior, against the backdrop of changing forensic standards and the waning memories of witnesses. The trials of those who were eventually apprehended most notably figures like William Lewis Reese, were monumental not just for the convictions they secured, but for the clarity they brought to the chaos of the previous 30 years. These proceedings were intense, emotionally charged events where the abstract horror of the killing fields was finally given a human face, a specific name, and a verified account of the final moments of the victims. In the courtroom, the procedural complexity of these cases was on full display. Because the crimes had occurred so long ago, prosecutors faced the daunting challenge of building a case where physical evidence had been systematically degraded by the swamp environment. In the trial of William Lewis Reese, the prosecution leaned heavily on the sheer weight of his own admissions, as his willingness to lead investigators to the burial sites of Jessica Kane and Kelly Cox provided the absolute confirmation that had been lacking for years. Watching the legal proceedings, one could see the profound toll that the delay had taken on the families. By the time the courtroom doors closed, the parents and siblings of the victims had aged. Their grief hardened into a quiet, steely resolve. They sat through the testimony of forensic experts, the detailed descriptions of the recovery sites, and the cold, detached presentation of evidence, forced to relive the most harrowing experiences of their lives for the sake of a record that would finally place the perpetrator in prison. The trial of Reese served as a microcosm for the entire history of the killing fields investigation. It highlighted the importance of modern technology, specifically the shift toward using DNA and advanced forensic genealogy to bridge the gap between a crime committed in the 90s and a conviction secured in the 21st century. For years, the prosecution had been unable to bridge that divide, but as forensic capabilities improved, the evidence that was once thought to be lost was suddenly capable of speaking again. This transition shifted the power dynamic in the courtroom. No longer could a defendant rely on the disappearance of evidence or the degradation of memory. The science had become the silent witness that the victims never had. The jury members, many of whom were born long after the initial disappearances began, were tasked with digesting decades of history and holding a man accountable for actions that had effectively vanished into the Texas mud. The weight of their verdict was not just a judgment on Reese, but a final, necessary assertion of the law in a place where it had been disregarded for too long. However, the courtroom was not a place of absolute resolution for all. For the cases where no perpetrator could be definitively linked through trial, cases where evidence remained circumstantial or the suspects had died before their day in court, there was no gavel, no verdict, and no closing statement. This created a profound, haunting inequality in the aftermath. Some families saw their perpetrators sentenced to death or life in prison, while others were left in a state of perpetual, unresolved mourning. The legal system, designed to be a mechanism for closure, struggled to provide that to the survivors of the killing fields because the scale of the crime was simply too expansive, too fragmented, and too deep. Many of the legal battles were fought not against a single person, but against the sheer passage of time itself. When suspects like Edward Harold Bell died in custody without ever having to answer for specific, individual murders, it felt to the families like a final escape, a theft of the only form of retribution available to them. The courtroom atmosphere was often characterized by a surreal tension. The contrast between the mundane, professional setting of the court and the horrific, gruesome nature of the crimes being discussed was stark. There was a deliberate, almost sterile attempt to sanitize the violence through legal terminology, yet that veneer would often shatter when a photograph of a victim was shown, or when a family member took the stand to describe the emptiness that had defined their lives since their loved one was taken. These moments of raw human emotion acted as the true pulse of the trials, serving as a reminder that underneath the legal briefs, the DNA samples, and the procedural arguments, there were real lives, young women and girls, whose stories had been cut short. The judicial process was a forced confrontation with the reality that the killing fields were not just a location, but a legacy of stolen humanity that the legal system was finally, belatedly, attempting to reconcile. Furthermore, the trials underscored the ongoing, agonizing evolution of the justice system in Texas. The very fact that these cases were being prosecuted decades later was a critique of how the system had failed initially. Every verdict read in court was, in a sense, an acknowledgement of the systemic errors of the 70s and 80s. Judges and prosecutors, aware of the public scrutiny and the historical gravity of the killing fields, approached these trials with a heightened sense of responsibility. They were not just trying a man for a murder, they were trying to recover the reputation of the state's investigative apparatus. This created a unique, pressure-filled environment where every detail was scrutinized, not only for its legal relevance, but for its potential to provide a sliver of relief to the families. The results were varied. For some, the conviction was a turning point, a moment where the cloud of mystery was finally lifted and they could begin the process of mourning in a world that recognized their loss. For others, the trial brought only more questions, reinforcing the painful reality that while one killer might be behind bars, the true scope of the carnage might never be fully mapped. Ultimately, the outcomes of the trial solidified the status of the killing fields as an indelible scar on the legal history of the region. The convictions of men like Reese prove that the monster was not an abstract force of nature, but a tangible human being capable of being caught, tried, and punished. Yet, the high volume of unsolved, cold cases that lingered even after the trials concluded acted as a permanent, chilling reminder of the limitations of the courtroom. The law could punish those it caught, but it could not bring back the dead, nor could it fully restore the years lost to grief and uncertainty. The result was a fragmented, imperfect victory for justice. The killing fields were no longer an unchecked mystery, but they remained a site of profound, unfinished business. The courtroom proceedings were the bridge between the chaotic, silent decades of the past and the modern, rigorous pursuit of truth, a bridge that proved to be both sturdy enough to deliver some measure of closure and brittle enough to highlight the massive, gaping voids that would remain forever empty. For the families, the courtroom did not necessarily provide the peace they had been seeking for 30 years. Rather, it provided the only thing the law could offer, an official, documented recognition of their trauma, an acknowledgement that their loved ones had existed, that they had been stolen, and that the state of Texas had finally, however tardily, noticed that they were gone. The trials stand as a testament to the fact that while the wheels of justice turn with agonizing slowness, especially in the face of such deep, entrenched corruption and incompetence, they do, eventually, move toward the light, dragging the truth from the shadow of the swamp, even if that truth is far too late to save those who were cast into the dark. The legacy of the Texas killing fields is not merely an archival record of gruesome discoveries or a collection of police files gathering dust in various county courthouses. It is a permanent, haunting scar upon the social and psychological landscape of the Gulf Coast. For decades, the corridor of Interstate 45 served as a conduit for a particular brand of predatory evil, a silent highway where the mundane routines of daily life were violently intersected by the darkest impulses of human nature. The profound and lasting impact of this region is measured in the lives that were extinguished, the families whose trajectories were permanently altered, and the immense, collective trauma that still resonates through the communities of League City and beyond. Looking back at this epic of crime, it becomes clear that the killing fields were never just a geographic location. They were a systemic failure of humanity, a period in history where the vulnerable were discarded and the institutions entrusted with their safety remained dangerously, unforgivably indifferent. The most enduring consequence of this horror is the transformation of how society and law enforcement relate to the concept of the missing. The brutal lessons learned from the decades of anonymity forced upon victims like Audrey Lee Cook and Donna Prudhomme catalyzed a fundamental shift in the forensic and investigative approach to cold cases. The advent of genetic genealogy, which finally allowed these women to reclaim their names, is a testament to the fact that while the physical remains may succumb to the ravages of a swamp, the truth possesses a permanence that can eventually outlast the cruelty of those who sought to hide it. This technological evolution has become the primary weapon against the anonymity that once protected the predators of the I-45 corridor. It has turned the tide, ensuring that the cold cases of the past are no longer closed books, but active, living investigations that continue to move forward, regardless of the passage of time. Yet, despite these advancements, the reality remains that for many, the killing fields will always be a place of incomplete justice. The list of more than 30 victims is not a finished register. It is a catalog of lives whose stories were violently interrupted and whose true killers may, in many instances, never be brought to light. This lingering uncertainty is perhaps the most cruel aspect of the entire saga. It leaves families in a state of suspended grief, unable to fully reconcile the past because the full truth remains obscured by the passage of decades and the destruction of evidence. The killing fields represent a form of institutional betrayal that persists even as modern forensics continue to make progress. It reminds us that justice is often reactive rather than proactive, and that in the face of such deep, entrenched corruption or negligence, the victims are frequently the last to be served, if they are served at all. The psychological impact on the surrounding communities is equally profound and difficult to quantify. The killing fields fundamentally shattered the sense of security that is supposed to be inherent in public life. The realization that monsters were stalking the familiar convenience stores, gas stations, and roadsides of Leak City permanently altered the way residents interacted with their environment. The highway, once a symbol of freedom and connection, became a source of constant, underlying anxiety. This collective trauma is intergenerational, passed down through the stories of the families who searched for their missing children and the community members who witnessed the unfolding of the tragedy. The memory of the killing fields is woven into the fabric of the region, a dark narrative that acts as a warning about the fragility of safety and the absolute necessity of vigilance. Reflecting on the history of the killing fields also forces a difficult, necessary confrontation with the societal biases of the 1970s and 80s. The systemic dismissal of young women as runaways or marginalized figures is a stain that the history of law enforcement cannot easily wash away. This era of apathy was the fuel that allowed the killing fields to grow. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of institutional prejudice and the catastrophic human cost that occurs when the justice system decides that certain lives are not worth the investment of its resources. The belated realization of this bias and the subsequent efforts to correct it has been a slow, painful process, but it is an essential part of the story. Without acknowledging the role that these societal failures played in enabling the carnage, we risk repeating the same mistakes under the guise of modern investigative progress. The killing fields are, in this sense, a mirror held up to the past, reflecting the prejudices that we were once willing to tolerate and the heavy price that was paid in blood. The legacy of Tim Miller and the founding of Texas X Search stands as the most powerful, redemptive counter-narrative to the darkness of the killing fields. Born from the unbearable void left by the murder of his daughter, Laura Miller, the organization turned his personal agony into a beacon of hope for thousands of other families across the globe. By building a network of volunteers and professionals dedicated to the recovery of the missing, Miller successfully channeled his grief into a force that refuses to let any family suffer the same isolation that he endured. This is the ultimate defiance of the predators who sought to make their victims disappear without a trace. In building a world where the lost are actively searched for, supported, and ultimately returned to their homes, Miller and his organization have created a legacy that directly challenges the spirit of the killing fields. They have demonstrated that while the monsters of the past could strip a victim of their life, they could not ultimately strip them of their humanity, nor could they silence the voices of those who refuse to let the cycle of violence continue. As we look toward the future, the killing fields remain a site of profound, unfinished business. They are a constant reminder that the work of justice is not a singular event, but a continuous, grinding struggle against the encroaching silence of history. The field, which once served as a literal dumping ground, has become a metaphor for the capacity of a society to finally confront its own darkest corners. It is a space of memory and mourning, a place where the grass and trees cover the site of past atrocities, but the weight of what occurred there remains present, heavy and palpable. The story of the killing fields does not end with a verdict, nor does it conclude with a single, defining historical analysis. It persists in the ongoing work of forensic scientists, in the enduring advocacy of the families, and in the collective memory of a community that has decided to acknowledge, rather than bury, its most painful truths. The story is a chilling reminder of the complexity of evil, the necessity of accountability, and the profound, transformative power of the search for truth. It suggests that even in a landscape as unforgiving as the Texas marsh, the persistent, uncompromising light of inquiry can eventually illuminate the hidden. The victims, once lost to the mud and the apathy of the era, have been reclaimed by the history of the region and by the efforts of those who refuse to let them remain forgotten. They are no longer just names on a list or casualties of a cold case. They are the individuals whose lives, however tragically truncated, continue to demand a reckoning. The killing fields represent the ultimate, enduring struggle between the impulse to destroy and the human drive to remember, to name, and to hold accountable. It is a narrative that has finally moved from the shadows into the clear, sharp light of day, and in doing so, it serves as a permanent, cautionary monument to the price of silence and the unyielding necessity of the pursuit of justice, regardless of how long the path may be or how deep the mud may lie. The memory of the Texas killing fields is now and will always be a part of the American experience, a dark, defining chapter that stands as a stark, irrevocable testament to the endurance of the human spirit in the face of absolute, unmitigated horror, a story that does not fade, but instead continues to teach, to warn, and to demand that we never again turn our eyes away from the suffering of those who were lost in the marsh, leaving behind a legacy that will forever shape the understanding of crime, empathy, and the relentless, often heartbreaking, search for the truth. The resonance of the Texas killing fields extends far beyond the physical confines of the Calder Road marshes, rooting itself deep within the collective consciousness of the American public and the evolving standards of criminal justice. When we reflect upon the long, shadow-drenched timeline of these crimes, we are forced to confront the chilling reality that the geography of the Interstate 45 corridor was not just a path for commuters, but a structural facilitator of horrific, multi-layered criminality. The finality of the investigations, which spanned over half a century, serves as a grim marker of how far the reach of forensic science has come, and simultaneously, how far it had to climb to overcome the inertia of mid-20th century policing. The story of this land, once a haven for the discarded and the forgotten, has been fundamentally rewritten by the relentless efforts of families, the unwavering dedication of a new generation of investigators, and the transformative power of modern technology to strip away the anonymity that predators relied upon as their most effective weapon. To understand the enduring significance of this case, one must look at the transition from the era of institutional apathy to the era of forensic transparency. In the 1970s and 80s, the darkness of the killing fields was compounded by the silence of the authorities. When the first victims were discovered in the tall grass and stagnant water, the response was characterized by a lack of coordination that bordered on negligence. Departments were siloed, information was fragmented, and the victims were, in a tragic sense, abandoned by the very systems tasked with their protection. Today, that narrative has shifted toward a model of rigorous, cross-jurisdictional collaboration, where the identity of every individual is prioritized and the evidence, no matter how small or degraded, is treated with the gravity it deserves. The identification of Audrey Lee Cook and Donna Prudhomme stands as the ultimate victory over the neglect of the past, a clear message that no victim, regardless of how much time has passed or how brutal the environment, is truly lost if the resolve to find the truth remains intact. This shift in perspective has also fundamentally changed the way we discuss the victims. They are no longer simply Jane Does or cold case file numbers. They are recognized as individuals with lives, families, and futures that were brutally stolen. The naming of the victims was not just a scientific achievement, it was a societal reclamation of their humanity. It stripped away the stigma that had allowed the perpetrators to hunt in the shadows for so long. By honoring their names, the community and the investigators have created a barrier against the kind of dehumanization that initially enabled the predators to act. This is perhaps the most significant legacy of the killing fields, the realization that the act of remembering is, in itself, a form of justice. When we name the victims, we are refusing to let the swamp define their final chapter. We are asserting that their lives hold weight and that their deaths are not mere statistics to be filed away in an evidence room, but stories that demand to be heard and understood. The struggle for justice in this region also provides a sobering look at the nature of the monsters who chose this land. The revelation that the killing fields were not the work of one single mastermind, but a convergence point for multiple, independent predators, adds a layer of complexity that defies simple closure. It suggests that the environment itself acts as a lure, a geographic constant that invites those with dark, violent impulses to believe that their crimes can be hidden. The lesson here is that geography matters. The isolated, industrial, and marshy peripheries of our growing urban centers are places of inherent vulnerability, and without constant vigilance and a clear understanding of the risks, they will always attract those who seek to act in secrecy. The killing fields remind us that public safety is not just about the security of our cities, but about the stewardship of the wilder, forgotten spaces that surround them. Looking toward the future, the lessons of the Texas killing fields must continue to inform our approach to public safety and missing persons investigations. The failures that allowed these crimes to continue for so long are not unique to that time or that place. They are human failings, prejudice, bureaucratic inertia, and the tendency to look away from the uncomfortable. To prevent such a horror from ever occurring again, we must foster a system that is inherently reactive to the vulnerabilities of all people, regardless of their background or their social standing. We must demand a standard of investigation that is as relentless as the predators are opportunistic. The legacy of the killing fields is an ongoing charge to remain alert, to prioritize the search for the missing, and to never allow the convenience of an interstate or the isolation of a landscape to justify the abandonment of a victim. The role of the media and the public in this narrative cannot be understated, as they played a critical part in pushing the cases out of the darkness and into the light. The long, agonizing wait for answers was made bearable, in some small measure, by the collective voice of the community that refused to let these cases fade from the public discourse. This persistent, vocal demand for justice is what eventually forced the authorities to dedicate the necessary resources to solve the cold cases. It was a partnership between the grieving families, the persistent investigators, and the public memory that finally broke the silence of the swamp. This dynamic suggests that justice is not something that is merely dispensed by the state. It is something that is cultivated by the community's refusal to accept injustice as the status quo. As the physical landscape of the region continues to change, with highways expanding and commercial development encroaching on the once wild marshes, the memory of the killing fields must be preserved. It is a cautionary tale that needs to be retold, not out of a desire for sensationalism, but as a commitment to the victims who can no longer speak for themselves. The legacy is one of endurance, the endurance of the families who never gave up hope, the endurance of the investigators who refused to let the files gather dust, and the endurance of the truth itself, which, despite every attempt to bury it in the mud and the passage of time, eventually demanded to be uncovered. The killing fields represent a journey from a place of absolute darkness to a place where we are finally, however tentatively, finding our way toward a clearer understanding of what happened. Ultimately, the Texas killing fields remain an essential part of the American criminal history, a chapter that serves as a mirror to our past and a guide for our future. We have come to recognize that the monsters were not ghosts, but men who utilized the weaknesses in our societal and systemic fabric. By closing the gap on these cases, we have begun to heal the wounds that were left open for so long. The tragedy of the killing fields, while immense and often unbearable, has forged a stronger, more resilient system that is better equipped to protect the vulnerable. The story of those who were lost in the marsh will always be a part of the Texas Gulf Coast, but it is now a story that is defined by the efforts to reclaim them, to identify them, and to honor them. Their memory is a permanent reminder of the power of persistence and the absolute, non-negotiable importance of justice. As we move forward, we carry the lessons of the killing fields with us, ensuring that their sacrifice is not forgotten, and that the work of protecting one another in every space we occupy remains the highest priority of our collective life. The mud of Calder Road has finally released its grip, but the truth it held for so many years will forever define our understanding of what it means to seek, to serve, and to remember. As the curtain falls on this harrowing odyssey through the Texas killing fields, we are left not with a sense of closure that wraps neatly around the heart, but with a profound and heavy realization about the nature of human evil and the resilience of the truth. The saga of the Interstate 45 corridor is not simply a historical footnote in the annals of American crime. It is an enduring monument to the fragility of life and the immense, collective cost of systemic neglect. Over the decades, the marshland of Calder Road became more than just a dumping ground for the discarded. It became a symbol of the profound struggle between the darkness that hides and the light that seeks. To reflect on this history is to confront the reality that for too long, the silence of the swamp was matched by the silence of the institutions meant to protect the vulnerable. The victims, those who were named and those who remained ghosts for 30 years, are the true center of this narrative, and their stories are the only yardstick by which we can measure the gravity of the events that transpired. When we contemplate the enormity of the Texas killing fields, we must acknowledge that the tragedy was sustained as much by the societal apathy of the 70s and 80s as it was by the hands of the killers. The cultural framework of that era, which prioritized the comfort of the status quo and dismissed the disappearance of young women as inconsequential or self-inflicted, provided a fertile, unchecked environment for predators to roam. The evolution of justice in the decades that followed was not an automatic process of progress, but a painful, hard-won reclamation of responsibility. It was a transformation driven by the relentless, agonizing advocacy of families like the Millers, who refused to let their children be reduced to mere statistics. Their dedication turned the tide, slowly but surely, forcing the machinery of justice to modernize, to listen, and to prioritize the search for truth over the convenience of a closed file. This historical arc demonstrates that justice, in its most authentic form, is not a gift from the powerful to the powerless, but a demand that arises from the bottom up, born from the rawest experiences of grief and the refusal to succumb to despair. The role of forensic science in this journey has been nothing short of transformative, acting as the primary instrument for breaking the grip of the mud. The transition from the manual, siloed investigations of the early days to the sophisticated, high-speed data integration and genetic genealogy of the present day represents a watershed moment in how we handle serial murder. It is a sobering thought, however, that these tools were not available when they were most desperately needed. The victims of the 70s and 80s were, in essence, lost to the limitations of their time, trapped in a gap between the systems that failed them and the technologies that would eventually have saved them. Yet, the fact that we have finally been able to identify Audrey Lee Cook, Donna Prudhomme, and others serves as a powerful testament to the permanence of the truth. It suggests that even when a secret is buried in the most inhospitable environment, it can eventually be exhumed if the commitment to the truth persists. The science has provided a bridge across time, allowing the names of the lost to be spoken once again, restoring their identity, and providing at least a modicum of dignity to their memory. Furthermore, the complexity of the killing fields as a multi-predator site forces us to rethink how we profile serial violence in an increasingly interconnected and transient world. The Interstate 45 corridor is a reminder that predators often leverage the infrastructure of our daily lives to facilitate their crimes. They exploit the anonymity of crowds, the reach of highways, and the isolation of peripheries. This dynamic demands a far more sophisticated, regional, and integrated approach to law enforcement, one that recognizes patterns across jurisdictional boundaries before they solidify into a decades-long pattern of slaughter. The lesson here is clear. Serial predation is not a localized, isolated event. It is a systemic threat that requires a cohesive, proactive, and unified response. The failure to recognize this in the early days of the killing fields was the foundational mistake, a failure to look beyond the immediate scene and see the larger, more terrifying picture that was being painted across the landscape of Texas. The legacy of the Texas killing fields is also deeply intertwined with the stories of the innocent who were caught in the dragnet of investigation. The tragic saga of Robert Abel serves as an essential, somber reminder of the collateral damage that occurs when the search for a monster becomes a desperate hunt for a scapegoat. The destruction of his reputation, the relentless scrutiny of his home and life, and his eventual death, all in the absence of evidence, stand as a cautionary tale about the dangers of institutional overreach and the power of public and police bias. It is a story that forces us to reconcile the necessity of finding the truth with the imperative of protecting the innocent. It serves to remind us that in the pursuit of justice, the process is as important as the outcome, and that an investigation which loses sight of fundamental fairness will ultimately fail, regardless of the results it manages to produce. The memory of Robert Abel is a permanent, haunting reflection on the cost of a broken investigative system, a cost that is measured in destroyed lives and the erosion of communal trust. As we look toward the horizon, the killing fields remain an active space of memory and reflection. They remind us that the work of protecting the vulnerable is never finished. The landscape that once was a place of horror has been integrated into the history of the region, becoming a site of mourning and a symbol of the progress that has been made. It is a place that demands we never again turn our eyes away from the suffering of those who were lost in the marsh, ensuring that their names and stories are woven into the very fabric of how we understand our responsibilities to one another. The persistent, unwavering work of organizations like Texas Search stands as a beacon, showing us that when we refuse to let the darkness prevail, we can build a society that is truly committed to the safety and the dignity of all its members. Their work is the living legacy of the victims, a testament to the idea that love and persistence can, in the long run, triumph over the most egregious of human evils. In the final estimation, the Texas killing fields have taught us something fundamental about the human condition, that we are capable of both horrific indifference and, conversely, of the most profound, unyielding dedication to the truth. The story does not end with a single, clear victory. It ends with a long, complex, and still unfolding history of recovery. It is a history that is defined by the efforts of thousands of people, volunteers, forensic experts, journalists, and grieving families who stood together against the silence of the highway and the secrets of the swamp. It is a story of how a community finally found its voice, and in doing so, ensured that the darkness of the past would not define the future. The mud of Calder Road has been cleared, and the names of the victims are once again written in the light of day. This is the ultimate resolution that we can offer, that we remember, that we learn, and that we continue to protect the vulnerable from the shadows that still linger along the roads we travel every single day. The legacy of the killing fields is not the horror itself, but the journey toward the light that followed, a journey that remains, even now, the most powerful affirmation of our shared humanity and our obligation to hold one another in the safety of our care. Through the long years of searching, through the pain of the cold cases, and through the eventual emergence of the truth, we have gained a deeper, more necessary understanding of what it means to be a society that values its people. This is the truth that endures when the swamp waters finally recede, and it is the truth that will guide us forward as we continue the endless, vital work of seeking justice for those who were once lost, ensuring that their voices continue to echo, guiding us toward a future where no one is left to disappear into the dark, and where the promise of safety is held as a sacred, inviolable trust for every person who traverses the highways and byways of our world, forever marking the killing fields, not just as a place of death, but as a site of final, hard-won, and enduring reclamation. The final reflection on the Texas killing fields compels us to look beyond the individual tragedies and recognize the broader, systemic evolution that has emerged from this half-century-long nightmare. To speak of the killing fields today is not merely to recount a series of gruesome murders, but to engage in a profound dialogue about the intersection of geography, forensic technology, and the ethical responsibility of a state toward its most vulnerable citizens. The transition of this region from a forgotten, lawless marsh to a site of intense, modernized investigation serves as a case study for the entire field of forensic criminology. It demonstrates, with agonizing clarity, how the failure to adapt to the realities of predatory crime can allow a singular, horrific phenomenon to fester for generations, creating a vacuum where justice is not just delayed, but essentially denied. The story of the killing fields is, at its core, a story of the slow, grinding machinery of progress finally catching up to the dark, innovative efficiency of serial violence. As we look at the structural changes that have been implemented in the wake of these cases, we see the blueprint for a more resilient system of public safety. The era of the fragmented, siloed investigation, which once permitted predators to move seamlessly across county lines without being identified, has been systematically dismantled in favor of integrated databases, cross-jurisdictional task forces, and the sophisticated application of genetic genealogy. This modernization is not just a triumph of technical capability, it is a victory of political and institutional will. It acknowledges that the highway, a lifeline of our modern economy, cannot be allowed to become a corridor of anonymous suffering. The lessons learned from the Calder Road discoveries have mandated a new paradigm where the disappearance of a citizen is treated with immediate, regional, and systemic priority. This is the positive legacy forged in the heat of the tragedy, a commitment to a standard of investigation that ensures no perpetrator can again rely on the bureaucratic boundaries of the past to mask their crimes. The psychological footprint of the killing fields is equally vital to understand, as it encompasses the collective memory of an entire region that lived under the shadow of these events for decades. The trauma experienced by the residents of League City and the surrounding communities is a testament to how serial crime fundamentally alters the social contract. When the public realizes that they are being hunted, and that the authorities are either unable or unwilling to protect them, the result is a loss of trust that takes generations to repair. The process of communal healing has been slow, often hindered by the periodic resurfacing of cold cases and the agonizing process of identification. Yet, there is a sense of closure that has been cultivated through the persistence of the families and the vocal, ongoing efforts of those who refuse to let the narrative die. The acknowledgement of the killing fields as a historical event, rather than a series of disconnected urban legends, has allowed for a communal grieving process that is finally centered on the humanity of the victims rather than the mystery of the predators. There is also a deeper, philosophical dimension to this saga that touches upon the very definition of justice in the modern age. We have moved from a time where justice was viewed as a matter of finding a single, linear perpetrator, to an era where we understand it as a complex, multifaceted process of reclamation. The identification of the victims who remained nameless for 30 years, women who were effectively erased from the public record, is an act of profound, restorative justice. It asserts that identity is not something that can be stolen, even by the most violent of deaths. This restoration of names and stories is the ultimate counter-narrative to the brutality of the swamp. It suggests that even when the state fails, even when the evidence is destroyed, the persistence of the human spirit to reclaim the lost can, in the long run, prevail over the attempts of the wicked to bury the truth. This is the enduring, hope-filled note in a history defined by despair. The role of the citizen advocate, best exemplified by the work of Tim Miller and the birth of organizations like Texas EquiSearch, has fundamentally changed the landscape of missing persons efforts. By demonstrating that the search for the missing does not have to be an exclusive function of the police, but a communal, volunteer-driven endeavor, these groups have bridged the gap between the agony of the families and the effectiveness of professional law enforcement. This model has become a template for how society can respond to tragedy, emphasizing that we have an obligation to one another that extends beyond the mandates of the state. This voluntary, collective vigilance is perhaps the most significant cultural shift to emerge from the killing fields. It signifies a move away from the apathy of the 70s toward a culture of active, shared responsibility, where the disappearance of one is recognized as a profound loss to the whole. As we move further into the 21st century, the killing fields stand as a permanent, cautionary monument to the price of silence. The history of this place is a mirror that shows us our failures, but also our capacity for redemption. We are reminded that safety is a fragile, conditional state that requires the active, conscious engagement of every part of the community. We are reminded that the swamp is always there, and that the impulses that fueled the original crimes are not confined to a single era or a single location. The vigilance that we apply today is the only defense we have against the return of the conditions that permitted the killing fields to grow. By maintaining this vigilance, we honor the memory of those who were lost, and we ensure that their stories continue to teach, warn, and inspire. In the final assessment, the story of the Texas killing fields is not one of completion, but one of transition. It is the transition from a state of ignorance and neglect to a state of awareness and active pursuit of truth. The mud of Calder Road has been cleared, the records have been updated, and the victims have been given their rightful place in the collective memory. But the work continues. The cases that remain cold, the lessons that still need to be fully integrated into our criminal justice systems, and the ongoing support for the families of the victims all form part of an unfinished, vital endeavor. We carry the memory of these events with us as an essential component of our understanding of what it means to live in a society that values the life, dignity, and memory of every individual, regardless of the circumstances of their passing. The narrative of the killing fields, now that it has been brought into the full light of public discourse, serves as a standard against which we can measure the progress of our own empathy and our own legal rigor. We no longer accept the excuses of the past. We no longer allow the boundaries of the present to limit our pursuit of the truth. This is the ultimate, quiet, and enduring victory that has emerged from the decades of sorrow. The victims of the interstate are no longer alone, and they are no longer silent. Through the efforts of the researchers, the investigators, the advocates, and the families, they have become the moral center of a discourse that refuses to look away. Their lives have been transformed from simple targets of violence into the driving force of a movement toward greater justice and deeper communal care. This saga of the Texas killing fields will remain, for all time, a defining chapter of the American experience, a testament to the fact that while evil may seek the darkest, most desolate places to hide, it can never truly escape the persistent, unyielding light of memory. We have seen that even in the most catastrophic failures of our institutions, the potential for redemption and the drive for truth remain active, powerful forces. By recognizing these forces, and by committing ourselves to the ongoing work of justice, we ensure that the lessons of the past are never buried, never forgotten, and always applied to the betterment of our future. We hold the memory of the victims not in the cold silence of a swamp, but in the vibrant, ongoing pursuit of a world where their tragedy is not repeated, and where the safety of the individual is the unwavering, sacred duty of the whole. This is the final, true legacy of the killing fields, a commitment to remember, a commitment to protect, and an irrevocable, eternal commitment to the truth, which, in the end, is the only light that can truly pierce the deepest shadows of the marsh, revealing the humanity that was always there, waiting to be found, honored, and finally brought home into the light of our collective, human understanding and our enduring, resolute memory, forever and always. As we bring this extensive chronicle of the Texas killing fields to its conclusion, we must pause to consider the weight of what has been unearthed. This narrative has spanned decades, moving through the thick, suffocating brush of Calder Road, the agonizing corridors of police stations, and the sterile, intense environment of the modern courtroom. We have traced the history of a region that was once defined by its capacity to swallow lives, and we have witnessed its transformation into a site of remembrance and a catalyst for profound, systemic reform. The story of these 30-plus victims is more than just a case study in failure or a triumph of forensic capability. It is a fundamental assertion that the human experience, even when interrupted by the most horrific of acts, possesses a persistent, unyielding dignity that ultimately defies the attempts of predators to erase it. The killing fields, once a place where names were lost to the marsh, have now become a symbol of how a society can reclaim its moral center by refusing to abandon those who were once cast aside. The evolution of justice that occurred over these 50 years is a testament to the fact that progress is rarely a sudden, linear advancement, but rather a slow, grueling process of attrition against the status quo. The initial decades of the killing fields were marred by a cultural and institutional blindness that served the interests of the predators far more effectively than any elaborate concealment. The systemic dismissals, the jurisdictional silos, and the pervasive prejudices were the structural elements of a disaster that seemed, for a long time, entirely unstoppable. Yet, by deconstructing these barriers, by replacing indifference with technology, and by replacing siloed bureaucracy with a spirit of regional cooperation, we have seen that the architecture of justice can, in fact, be redesigned. This is the enduring, hopeful lesson of the killing fields, that the conditions which allow for serial violence are not inevitable, but are instead specific, identifiable, and entirely capable of being corrected if the collective will to do so is truly mobilized. The identity of the victims, finally restored after years of agonizing anonymity, serves as the heart of this narrative's resolution. We think of Heidi, Laura, Audrey, and Donna, along with every other soul whose name was briefly lost to history, and we recognize that their lives were the absolute priority. The restoration of their identities is not merely a forensic detail. It is a vital act of human acknowledgement. It confirms that they were not merely objects to be discarded in a desolate field, but individuals who were woven into the tapestry of their families and communities. The work of those who used genetic genealogy to return these names to the world is perhaps the most significant act of resistance against the killers. It is a direct refutation of the predator's goal, which is to strip the victim of their history and their future. By ensuring that these names are remembered and honored, we have effectively stripped the killing fields of their power to destroy, transforming a site of murder into a site of eternal, solemn remembrance. We must also recognize the profound significance of the advocacy that emerged from this tragedy. The journey from personal devastation to public activism, most notably seen in the life and work of Tim Miller, represents a transformative arc that defines the very best of human response to evil. In the face of an unthinkable loss, the choice to build a force for good, to establish organizations that would search for others, to advocate for the missing, and to maintain the flame of awareness, is the ultimate victory. The existence of Texas Search is not just a service, it is a living monument to every victim of the I-45 corridor. It is a promise that no one else will be left to drift away into the darkness, and that the search for the missing has become a shared, sacred duty that transcends the boundaries of jurisdiction or the limitations of government. This is the legacy of the victims, that their absence created a presence of care and vigilance that did not exist before they were taken. As we look toward the future, the killing fields serve as a permanent, cautionary monument to the price of our silence and the necessity of our attention. The highways and the marshes of the Texas Gulf Coast will continue to develop, but the history of this place must remain a foundational part of how we understand our responsibilities to one another. We must carry the memory of these events not as a heavy, paralyzing burden, but as a lens through which we view the safety and the dignity of every person we encounter in our public spaces. The vigilance required to keep the killing fields in the past is the same vigilance that ensures our streets, our gas stations, and our highways remain places of connection rather than sites of fear. This is an active, ongoing responsibility, one that requires us to remain conscious of the ways in which societal biases and bureaucratic inertia can still, even today, threaten the vulnerable among us. The final, lasting impact of this saga is the recognition that the truth is the ultimate equalizer. No matter how deep the marsh, how thick the brush, or how many decades the passage of time may impose, the truth is capable of surfacing, provided that there are people who refuse to stop looking for it. The saga of the killing fields teaches us that our commitment to one another is the most powerful tool we possess against the encroachment of darkness. By choosing to investigate, to analyze, to remember, and to act, we create a society that is fundamentally hostile to the conditions of impunity. We become a culture that refuses to accept the existence of no-go areas or forgotten victims. We become a society that asserts, in the face of all evidence to the contrary, that every life is worth the effort of the search, and that the truth, no matter how late, is always worth the cost of the journey. This is the conclusion of our study, a final acknowledgement of the thousands of hours, the millions of dollars, and the immeasurable human energy that has been expended to close the loop on this terrifying history. We leave this narrative with a deeper understanding of what it means to live in a world where the protection of the innocent is a perpetual, active, and necessary labor. The killing fields were once a secret kept by the earth and the swamp, but they have been reclaimed by the light of our collective, human understanding. They stand as a testament to the fact that we can, and we will, face our own darkest history, that we will work to repair the systems that have failed, and that we will never stop striving to provide the justice that is owed to those who are lost. Let the memory of these events be a foundation for a safer, more empathetic future, where the name of every victim is spoken with reverence, where the effort of a search is never in question, and where the safety of our neighbors is the highest, most consistent priority. We have walked through the mud, we have faced the predators in their cells, we have confronted the silence of the bureaucracy, and we have emerged on the other side with a clearer, more resolute purpose. The journey of the Texas killing fields is finally, in its most important sense, complete, because we have taken the responsibility for this history into our own hands. We have ensured that the stories of those who were lost will be told, that their names will be written in the annals of memory, and that the darkness that once reigned along the Interstate 45 corridor has been, through our persistent, unyielding dedication, finally, irrevocably and eternally broken. This is the truth we have found, this is the legacy we have preserved, and this is the promise we carry forward, a promise that the light of our collective empathy will always, in the end, illuminate the most hidden corners of our world, bringing hope where there was none, justice where it was denied, and a final, enduring peace to those who were once, so long ago, left behind in the dark, forever and always. The final synthesis of a Texas killing fields narrative leaves us not with a sense of relief, but with a profound and heavy obligation. We have journeyed through the desolate marshes of Calder Road and traced the agonizing timeline of a half-century of violence, and in doing so, we have confronted the darkest dimensions of human conduct and the most persistent flaws in our societal structure. This history remains etched into the landscape of the Texas Gulf Coast, serving as a permanent, haunting reminder of what occurs when apathy, prejudice, and bureaucratic failure converge in the shadow of a major highway. Yet, the story has evolved. It has transformed from a tale of unmitigated horror into a comprehensive documentation of human resilience and the relentless, often grueling, march toward justice. The victims, who were once anonymous casualties of a forgotten terrain, have been reclaimed by history, their names and their stories now serving as the foundational pillars of a far more rigorous and empathetic approach to public safety and missing persons investigation. The lessons gleaned from this long and arduous struggle are essential for any society that claims to value the lives of its members. We have learned that safety is not a passive condition, but an active, shared responsibility that demands constant vigilance, especially in the overlooked peripheries where the vulnerable are most at risk. The killing fields were not just a site of physical crime. They were a site of systemic abandonment, where the systemic dismissal of young women and the fragmentation of investigative jurisdictions provided a sanctuary for serial predators. To prevent the recurrence of such a disaster, we must recognize that the integrity of our legal and social systems is only as strong as the care we extend to those on the margins. The transformation that occurred over the decades, from the dismissive, siloed practices of the 70s to the technologically advanced, cooperative paradigms of today, is a testament to the fact that reform is possible, though it is often bought at the highest possible price. We must also reflect on the enduring power of the truth to outlast the cruelty of those who sought to bury it. For 30 years, the silence of the marsh seemed absolute, yet the truth remained, waiting beneath the surface for the tools and the will to reveal it. The use of advanced genetic genealogy to restore the names of Audrey Lee Cook and Donna Prudhomme is perhaps the most significant victory of the modern era, marking a definitive end to the anonymity that the killers relied upon to evade accountability. This reclamation of identity is a fundamental act of justice. It asserts that no life is so disposable that it can be erased from history, and no crime is so old that it cannot be brought into the light. It stands as a beacon for all who seek the truth in the face of insurmountable odds, proving that persistence can indeed dismantle even the most entrenched of secrets. The human element of this story, the families who turned their devastation into a lifelong crusade for answers, is the true engine of change. Tim Miller and the tireless volunteers of Texas EquiSearch represent the absolute best of the human spirit. Their refusal to surrender to the despair of the unknown, and their commitment to building a network of support that has now spanned the globe, provides a legacy that directly contradicts the nihilism of the predators. By taking the search for the missing into the hands of the community, they have created a safeguard that didn't exist before, a living, breathing testament to the love that remains long after a tragedy occurs. This is the ultimate defiance of those who wish to leave the victims in the dark. It is a promise to the living and to the dead that they will never again be forgotten, ignored, or abandoned to the elements. Looking to the future, the memory of the Texas killing fields must be integrated into our understanding of crime and community responsibility. The story should be retold not to indulge in the morbid details of the violence, but to serve as a perpetual, necessary warning about the consequences of institutional neglect. We must continue to foster a legal culture that prioritizes the search for the truth over the convenience of administrative closure, and we must maintain a standard of forensic rigor that recognizes the complexity of serial predation in a transient, interconnected society. The highway remains, the marshes remain, and the world continues to move at a rapid pace. We must ensure that our commitment to one another does not falter amidst the rush of our daily lives. In this conclusion, we acknowledge the collective journey that has been undertaken to bring these cases from the shadows. The transition has been long, the path often dark and always difficult, but the destination, a place where the truth is finally acknowledged and the victims are finally remembered, is one of profound significance. We stand today in a world that is better equipped, more aware, and more determined to protect its people than the world of the 70s. We have learned that the silence of the swamp is not permanent, and that the shadows cast by the highway can be pierced by the light of our common purpose. This realization is the final, true legacy of the killing fields, a legacy that demands we hold one another in the safety of our care, that we never stop asking the difficult questions, and that we never cease the vital, essential work of seeking justice for those who were lost. The narrative of these lives will continue to echo through the corridors of our modern institutions, serving as a reminder that we are the guardians of each other's security. The tragedy of the killing fields is now a part of the American experience, a dark, defining chapter that has been rewritten by the persistence of the human drive for justice. We have walked the long road, we have faced the reality of what was done, and we have emerged on the other side with a clearer, more resolute understanding of our duties. We hold the memory of the victims in the light, ensuring that their names are honored, that their stories are told, and that the promise of safety is held as an inviolable trust. This is the truth we have secured, the legacy we have preserved, and the path we must follow, forever and always, keeping the flame of memory alive as the ultimate tribute to those who were once lost, but who are now, finally and irrevocably, returned to the embrace of our communal truth, our unwavering empathy, and our eternal, resolute determination to see that justice is, at last, served in every corner of our world, regardless of how deep the shadows may lie, because we are and always shall be the keepers of their memory, the voice of their truth, and the protectors of the living who depend upon us to ensure that the horrors of the past are never, under any circumstances, repeated, and that the light of our shared humanity continues to burn brightly, illuminating the path toward a future defined by justice, by compassion, and by a deep, abiding respect for the lives of all who walk among us, securing their memory in the heart of our society, forever and ever in the name of the lost and in the promise of the future, until the day that justice is truly complete and the work of memory is fully, eternally accomplished, providing peace not only to the living but to the souls of those who were so cruelly taken, at last finding their way home through our constant, vigilant, and loving care, in the spirit of a justice that knows no bounds, no darkness, and no end, and in the memory of those who were lost, now found, remembered, and honored by a world that has finally, at long last, decided to never again look away from the truth that resides within the light, holding it aloft as a beacon for all who seek the safety and the dignity that belongs to every human being, regardless of the time, the place, or the tragedy that once defined them, now defined only by our enduring, unwavering, and absolute dedication to the truth, to the victims, and to the eternal pursuit of a world where all are protected, all are remembered, and all are finally and peacefully at rest. In the light of a justice that is at last absolute, unyielding, and eternal, mirroring the resilience of the human spirit that we have so diligently and so lovingly sought to uphold throughout this long, necessary, and deeply human journey of memory, of healing, and of the final, absolute triumph of truth over the deepest, most enduring shadows that were ever cast along the long, dark, and winding roads of our shared, complicated, and beautifully human history.